Hello Fanatics, welcome back to Diamond Painting Fanatics. I am Cindy and today I thought I would do another episode of my true crime series. Feel free to grab any project you're working on, a cup of tea or sparkling, whatever whatever tickles your fancy, and come join me. Today I will be discussing a very tragic story of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, which is also known as the Soham murders. Very, very tragic. Should never have happened. He should never have been a school caretaker, but we will discuss as we go along. Yeah, so grab those projects, grab a drink, get comfy, and I will just delve straight into the story of Holly and Jessica, two best friends. Okay, so at 11:45 on Sunday the 4th of August 2002, Jessica left her home to attend a barbecue at the home of her best friend Holly. Prior to leaving her home, Jessica was chatting to her parents about the intention of giving Holly a gift that she'd bought on holiday, and it was she went to where did she go? Menorca, and she bought her best friend a gift, and it was a necklace with the letter H inscribed or engraved on it. Are we done with all of these? I think we are. Right. So yeah, she was going round to have a barbecue and give her friend this gift that she'd bought her in Menorca on holiday, and her and another friend called Natalie, they were playing computer games and listened to music for approximately half an hour. Before Natalie went home. By 3:15, both girls had changed into distinctive Manchester United football shirts. One belonged to Holly and the other belonged to her older brother Oliver. At 5:04 p.m, a photograph of the two girls was taken by Holly's mum before the children had dinner with the house guests. So they were having like friends over and having a barbecue. Yeah, so they changed into shirts, and at 5 o'clock her mum took a photo of the two girls in these football shirts, and then they returned to playing in Holly's room at just gone 6 o'clock. At 6:15, the girls decided that they were going to go and buy some sweets, but they didn't tell anyone where they were going. And obviously because they had friends round and their mum and dad were busy with their friends, and the girls thought, oh, we'll just take a walk. And off they went. They left the house and went to go buy some sweets. While returning, Holly and Jessica walked past the college close, home of Ian Huntley, the senior caretaker at the local secondary school. Huntley lured the girls into his house, stating that his girlfriend Maxine Parr, it was the girls' teaching assistant at their primary school. He told them that she was in the house, but she actually wasn't. She was visiting her mum in Grimsby, so she wasn't even in the house. The precise chain of events to occur after the girls entered his house is unknown, although investigators believe section of Huntley's later claims in initial interviews granted to the media prior to his arrest and later trial testimony, such as that he had been cleaning his dog at the time the girls passed by his house at approximately 6:30, and that one girl had been suffering with a mild nosebleed. This may have actually been true. In any event, the cause of death of both girls was later ruled as asphyxiation. Jessica's mobile phone was switched off at 6:46 p.m. That makes my eyes water because it's like 15 minutes later that they entered his house and then he's turned her phone off. At 8 p.m, Nicola Wells, that's Holly's mum, entered her daughter's bedroom to invite the girls to say goodbye to their house guests, only to discover that both children were missing from their home. Alarmed, she and her husband Kevin searched the house and nearby streets. Minutes after their daughter's 8:30 p.m. curfew had expired, Nicola had phoned Jessica's house to determine if the girls were at that location, only to learn that Leslie and Sharon were becoming concerned why their youngest daughter hadn't returned home. Following subsequent frantic efforts by the families of both girls to locate their daughters, Holly and Jessica were reported missing by their parents at 9:55 p.m. Now this is really, it's an upsetting, it's a tragic story, but to think that when her mum went in at 8 p.m. to go say to the girls, I'll go and say goodbye, thinking that they were in their room, just, you really would. And they had probably passed away already when she went in that room to look for them. That's so tragic. Anyway, right, investigation. Police immediately launched an intensive manhunt to locate the missing children. Over 400 officers were assigned full-time to search for the girls. These officers conducted extensive house-to-house inquiries across Surrey. Their efforts to search local terrain were bolstered by the assistance of hundreds of local volunteers, and later United States Air Force personnel stationed at nearby air bases. To assist in their public appeals for information, Cambridgeshire Police released the photograph Nicola had taken of the children less than 2 hours before their disappearance, depicting both girls wearing distinctive Manchester United replica football shirts. A physical description of each girl was also released to the media, describing both girls as being white, approximately 4 foot 6 inches tall, and slim. Jessica was described as having being tanned with shoulder-length brown hair. Holly was described as being fair with blonde hair. The parents of both girls were adamant their daughters had been wary of talking with strangers, having warned them not to trust individuals they did not know from early childhood. He wasn't a stranger. They knew who he was, and they knew the teaching assistant who was not at home when he said that she was. Anyway, suspecting the children had been kidnapped, investigators questioned every registered sex offender in Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire. Over 260 registered sex offenders across the UK, including 15 high-risk paedophiles, were also questioned, although they were all eliminated from the inquiry. Police also investigated the possibility that the girls had arranged to meet with an individual either or both had contacted via an internet chat room, although this possibility was soon discounted. On the 8th of August, CCTV footage of the girls recorded minutes before their disappearance was released to the public. This footage depicted the children arriving at the local sports centre at 6:28 p.m. A televised reconstruction of the children's last known movements were also broadcast nationally on the 10th of August, and both sets of parents granted an interview with presenter Colin Baker on ITV's programme known as Tonight, which was broadcast on the 12th of August. Other family members and friends of both girls also appealed to the media for the safe return of the children. These appeals for information regarding the whereabouts of Holly and Jessica would see more than 2,000 phone calls and tips received from the public, with all information obtained entered into the investigation's Homes 2 database. A candlelit vigil was held at the community on the 7th of August. Oh, they must have been so frantic. So frantic. Shortly after the children's disappearance, Staffordshire Police contacted their counterparts to report their suspicions the girls' likely abduction may be linked to an abduction which occurred in their jurisdiction the previous year. A 6-year-old girl had survived an indecent assault by an abductor who was still at large, and whose green Ford Mondeo was identified as having number plates which had earlier been stolen in Peterborough. The individual responsible for this abduction and assault was also believed to have followed a 12-year-old girl in the same area, although in this instance his car had been fitted with number plates which had been stolen from Nottinghamshire. The same vehicle had recently been sighted in CLACTON, Cambridgeshire. This information was later included in a televised appeal pertaining to the children's disappearance on the BBC's Crime Watch, although this potential lead ultimately failed to bear any fruition or relevance. God. And they have to work with the information they get, so... Sightings. I'm just going to take a swig of tea. Several members of the public reported having seen the children in the early days of the investigation. One individual, Mark Tuck, informed investigators that he had driven past the girls upon Sand Street in Soham Town Centre at approximately 6:30 on the 4th of August. His attention had been drawn towards their Manchester United replica shirts, causing him to remark to his wife, "Lucy, look, there's two little Beckhams over there." A young woman named Karen was also reported seeing the girls walking arm in arm along College Road at approximately 2 minutes later. Another woman living in the nearby village of Little Thetford claimed to have seen two girls whose appearance and clothing matched those of Wells, Holly and Jessica, walking past her home the morning after the children had been reported missing. The morning after? Oh my God. Police also received statements regarding a white van that had been seen in Soham on the evening of the children's disappearance. Investigators located and seized this vehicle from a caravan park in Wentworth on the 7th of August, although this lead ultimately proved fruitless. On the 12th of August, police launched a media appeal to trace the driver of a four-door dark green saloon car seen struggling with two young girls by a taxi driver who stated that he had observed this individual thrashing his arms as he struggled to either placate or contain two female children inside his vehicle as he had driven upon the A142 south of Soham towards Newmarket on the early evening of 12th of August. The following evening, a jogger alerted police to two mounds of recently disturbed earth he had encountered at Warren Hill, just outside Newmarket. The initial speculation by this individual had been that these mounds of earth may be the impromptu burial locations of the two missing girls. However, an overnight examination of this location revealed the two mounds of earth to simply be badger sets. One individual who claimed to have spoken with the girls immediately before their disappearance was 28-year-old Huntley, who informed investigators on the 5th of August he had engaged in a brief conversation with both girls on his doorstep the previous afternoon. According to Huntley, Holly and Jessica had briefly inquired as to whether his partner, Maxine, had been successful in a recent application for a full-time teaching assistant position at their school. When he replied that Maxine had been unsuccessful, one of the girls said, "Tell her we're very sorry," before both children had walked along College Street in the direction of a bridge leading towards Clay Street. Police were suspicious of Huntley's account of the children's disappearance. His house was searched by a single police officer on the 5th of August, although no incriminating evidence was discovered on this date. This officer noticed numerous items of clothing upon the washing line, despite the fact it had been raining. In reference to the evident extensive cleaning of the house's interior, Huntley stated, "Excuse the dining room, we had a cleaning of the house's interior." Oh, sorry. I've jumped up again. Excuse the dining room. We had a flood. This officer was unconvinced by Huntley's claims and was suspicious of his agitated demeanour, and he remained a strong suspect. So he was a suspect straight away. Wow. One day later, on the 6th of August, Huntley drove from Solham to Grimsby to pick up Maxine. Shortly before the two returned to College Close, a neighbour of Maxine's mother, named Marion Clift, observed the couple standing at the rear of the vehicle with the boot open. According to Clift, a pale, shaking Huntley had simply gazed into the boot for several moments while Carr stood alongside him, her head bowed, weeping. When Huntley became aware of Clift's presence, he had abruptly closed the boot. Are you telling me the girls are in there? That's what I'm getting from that. Oh my God. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just reading into it, but it certainly sounds that way. Media interviews. In the weeks following the disappearance, Huntley reluctantly granted several television interviews to the media, such as Sky News and the regional BBC News programme BBC Look East. Speaking of the general shock in the local community and his apparent dismay at being the last individual to see the children alive. In one interview granted to Sky News correspondent Jeremy Thompson during the second week of the search, he claimed to be holding on to a glimmer of hope. The children would be found safe and well, claiming that he had last seen the girls walking in the direction of the local library on a Sunday evening. Having actively participated in the search for the children, Huntley also made efforts to integrate police officers regularly, asking questions as how their investigation was progressing and just how long DNA evidence could survive before deteriorating. Ding, ding, ding. One of these officers observed 3 vertical scratches upon Huntley's left jaw, each measuring approximately 3 centimetres, which he claimed had been recently inflicted by his dog. Maxine was also interviewed by the press during the second week of the search of the children. In this live interview, Maxine corroborated Huntley's claims to have conversed with the children on the doorstep as she had been bathing before both girls had walked away from their doorstep. Let me go back to that, because she's backed up his claims to have conversed with the children on their doorstep as she had been bathing before both girls had walked away from their doorstep. She wasn't even there, so why I only wish we had asked them where they were going. If only we knew that then, what we know now, then we could have stopped them or done something about it. What on earth? She wasn't even there. She was at her mum's in Grimsby. Or was she? Yes, she was, because the neighbour said that he came and picked her up. What on earth? Why would... Do you get my dismay here? Because if my partner... He's obviously told her what's happened. I'm assuming he has. I would not be backing up my partner at all. I'd be like, well, I wasn't here, I was at my mum's, so... Some people... Okay. Discussing the individual personalities of each girl, Maxine described Holly as being the more feminine of the two, adding that Jessica was more of a tomboy, and that on one occasion she had jokingly remarked to Jessica how, unlike many of her friends, she seldom wore a skirt. To this question, Maxine stated the child had expressed her desire to be a bridesmaid at her own future wedding, adding how Jessica had said that she would be willing to wear a dress for such an occasion. Maxine also displayed a thank you card to this reporter, which had recently been given to her by Holly on the last day of the school year, referring to Holly in the past tense. She stated, "She was just lovely, really lovely," before making a direct appeal to the children. Just get on the phone and just come home, or if somebody's got them, just let them go. Wow. So she does know. By the second week of the children's disappearance, Huntley had begun to lose weight and vividly displayed symptoms of insomnia. To one officer, he begged the question, "You think I've done it?" I was the last person to see them before beginning to weep. His erratic and distressful behaviour led to his being prescribed antidepressants on the 13th of August. Yeah. Well, we know he did do it now, but... Sorry, spoiler alert. Oh, goodness me. Okay, police suspicions. On the 16th of August, 12 days after the children's disappearance, Huntley and Carr were first questioned by police. Both were questioned for approximately 7 hours. Each provided formal witness statements to investigators before being placed in a safe house in the village of Histon. By this date, police had received information from several Grimsby residents who had recognised Huntley in the television interviews he had granted to the media. These individuals recalled that he had been accused of rape several years earlier. Other individuals recalled that, contrary to her own televised claims, Carr had in fact been socialising in Grimsby town centre on the night that the girls had disappeared, and not at home in Soham, as she indicated in the interview that she had granted to the media. The same evening, police conducted a thorough search of both Huntley's house and the grounds of Soham Village College, where Huntley worked as a senior caretaker. As the couple remained under police watch at separate locations, outside of Soham. Although each room of Huntley's home had evidently been recently and meticulously cleaned with what was later described as being a lemony cleaning fluid, these searches located numerous items declared as being of major importance to the ongoing investigation. Although the evidence and artifacts were not made public at this time, the items recovered from the school grounds included items of clothing the girls had been wearing when last seen, including their charred and cut Manchester United shirts, which were recovered from a bin within a hangar at Huntley's place of work. Fibres recovered upon these items of clothing proved to be a precise match to the samples retrieved from both Huntley's body and his clothing, and from his house. Furthermore, his fingerprints were recovered from the bin. Huntley's car was also subjected to a detailed forensic examination on the 16th of August. The forensic examination of this vehicle revealed that the car had also been recently and extensively cleaned, although traces of a distinctive mixture of brick dust, chalk and concrete of precisely the same type used to pave the road leading to where the girls' bodies would be discovered were found around the wheel arches and upon and around the pedals. Furthermore, a cover from the rear seat was missing, and the lining of the boot had been recently removed and replaced with an ill-fitting section of household carpet. Having discovered the children's clothes at Soham Village College, police decided to arrest Huntley and Carr. Both were arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder at 4:30 a.m. on the 17th of August. Although investigators had previously publicly stated they strongly believed that the children had been abducted, they publicly announced their strong suspicions both girls had been murdered on this date. During initial questioning, Huntley refused to answer questions and appeared evasive, confused, and emotionally detached, occasionally drooling throughout the police attempts to question him in an effort to fake symptoms of mental illness. This tactic left police with no option but to initially refer Huntley to a mental hospital to undergo an extensive psychological evaluation. I don't understand why they do this, but by contrast, Maxine quickly confessed to detectives she had lied about her whereabouts and her partner's actions on the 4th of August. Shortly before she had returned to Soham from Grimsby 3 days later, Huntley had claimed to her in a phone call to have seen the two girls shortly before their disappearance, admitting, "The thing is, Maxine, they came in our house." According to Carr, or Maxine, Huntley then informed her that the children had entered their home in order that Holly could stop her nosebleed. He then claimed to her Jessica had sat upon their bed as she helped Holly. They used the surnames. I don't like to do that. Had helped Holly control the bleeding from her nose before both girls had left their home. Referencing one of the 1998 rapes he had committed, but had earlier claimed to her to have been falsely accused of this in a phone call, Huntley then began voicing concerns as it again Huntley then began voicing concerns as to again being falsely accused of involvement on this occasion, also claiming his previous arrest had caused him to suffer a nervous breakdown. That's guilt, not. She had therefore later agreed to concoct a false story with her partner to support his version of events. Yeah, no. Would not be happening. After being informed of the discovery of the children's bodies and the ample evidence attesting to Huntley's guilt, including his fingerprints being recovered from the bin in which the children's clothes had been found, Maxine burst into tears, shouting, "No, he can't have been. It can't have been. He hasn't done it." Despite these revelations, Maxine initially remained emotionally attached to Huntley and professed her belief in his innocence to both the police and her family. At approximately 12:30 p.m. on the 17th of August, a 48-year-old gamekeeper named Keith Pryor discovered the bodies of both girls lying side by side in a 5 feet deep ditch close to a pheasant pen near the perimeter fence of RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, a location more than 10 miles east of Soham. Pryor had noticed what he later described as an unusual and unpleasant smell in the vicinity several days earlier when returning to the area with two friends on the 17th of August. He had decided to investigate the cause of this odour, walking through an overgrown verge approximately 600 yards from a partially tarmacked road. Pryor and one of his companions, Adrian Lawrence, discovered the children's bodies. Immediately upon viewing the corpses, Lawrence turned in the direction of his girlfriend and shouted, "Don't come any closer, get back in the van." And he immediately reported the discovery to the police. Both girls had been missing for 13 days when their bodies were found, and both corpses were in an advanced state of decomposition. In an apparent effort to destroy forensic evidence, the murderer or murderers had attempted to... Oh my goodness. Had attempted to burn both bodies. In addition, no clear footprints were discovered at the crime scene. Despite the perpetrators' efforts to destroy evidence and hinder identification, investigators rapidly deduced who the two victims were most likely were, and that both had not died at the location of their discovery. Numerous hairs determined to belong to Jessica were also discovered on a tree branch close to the location of the girls' bodies. The following day, a Cambridgeshire Deputy Chief Constable named Keith Hodder released a press statement to the media confirming the discovery of the children's bodies, adding that both families had been informed of the developments and that although positive formal identification would take several days, investigators were as certain as they could possibly be that the bodies were those of Holly and Jessica. On the 21st of August, the bodies of both girls were conclusively identified via DNA testing. 9 days later, a public memorial service was held at Ely Cathedral to remember and celebrate the lives of both girls. This service was attended by approximately 2,000 people, including the girls' classmates, teachers, and the 6 family liaison officers who had provided 24-hour service for both families. The Reverend Tim Alban Jones officiated this service. informing all present, we would not the best and most lasting memorial of these two lovely young girls be a change for the better in how we behave towards each other. Today's service is a small milestone in our shared journey of grief and sorrow. It is our hope that we may perhaps draw a line under one phase of our grieving and begin to look forward. In an online book of condolences attracted more than 31,000 messages of grief and sympathy, and on the 24th of August, football clubs across Britain held a minute's silence prior to commencing scheduled football matches. The formal inquest into the children's death was held at Shire Hall, Cambridge, on the 23rd of August 2002. At this hearing, Coroner David Morris testified the bodies of both girls were partially skeletonized, and that no precise cause of death could be determined for either girl, although Morris stated that the most likely cause of death of both girls had been asphyxiation. Furthermore, Morris stated that the girls had almost certainly not died at the location where their bodies had been discovered, and that both bodies had been placed at this location within 24 hours of their death. These conclusions were physically supported by an analysis of the shoots and nettles located at the crime scene, which enabled forensic ecologist and paleontologist Patricia Wiltshire to approximate that the actual time the bodies had been placed at this location had been almost 2 weeks prior. By the 20th of August, investigators had established sufficient physical evidence from Huntley's home, vehicle and Soham Village College to formally charge him with 2 counts of murder. He was formally charged with these offences while detained for observation at Rampton Secure Hospital, and all preliminary hearings against him were postponed until the conclusions of his mental health assessment. Maxine was also charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice on this date. She was further charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender on the 17th of January 2003. While held on remand at Holloway Prison, Maxine regularly inquired as to Huntley's welfare, and is known to have penned several letters in which she professed her continued love for him. Maxine would only sever all contact with Huntley in December 2002. Mental health assessment. Here we go. To determine Huntley's state of mental health, he was detained under Section 48 of the Mental Health Act for almost 2 months at Rampton Secure Hospital. Here, his mental health state was extensively assessed by Dr. Christopher Clark, a consultant forensic psychiatrist, to determine whether he suffered from any form of mental illness and whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. Clark concluded in October that although psychopathic, Huntley did not suffer from any major mental or physical or psychotic illness. Resulting on the 8th of October, Huntley was deemed mentally competent to stand trial. Having been declared mentally fit to stand trial, Huntley was faced with a sentence of life imprisonment if a jury could be convinced of his guilt. He was subsequently transferred to a segregation unit at Wood Hill Prison in Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire. On the 9th of June 2003, he attempted suicide by consuming 29 antidepressants, which he accumulated in his cell. Although staff initially feared Huntley might die as a result of this overdose, he was returned to his prison cell within 48 hours. That brings me a little bit of joy, I won't lie. Huntley was later transferred to London's Belmarsh prison. The funeral services of Holly and Jessica were conducted on consecutive days in September 2002. Services for both the children were held. It's so sad when you're saying children. Were held at St Andrew's Parish Church, and both were officiated by the Reverend Tim Alban Jones. Both girls were laid to rest in private ceremonies attended by only family and close friends, at the request of both families that their privacy be respected. The media refrained from reporting upon either service. At a preliminary hearing held at the Old Bailey on the 16th of June 2003, Huntley pleaded not guilty to the formal charges of murdering Holly and Jessica, although he chose to plead guilty to the charge. Both stood accused of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Maxine pleaded not guilty to the charges of attempting to pervert the course of justice and assisting an offender. Seriously? The trial of Huntley for the murders of Holly and Jessica opened at the Old Bailey on the 5th of November 2003 before Justice Alan Moses. Huntley was charged with 2 counts of murder, to which he entered a formal plea of not guilty. Maxine was charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. In his opening statement on behalf of the Crown, Prosecutor Richard Latham, QC, described the last day of the friends' lives and how by pure chance they happened to pass by Huntley's home at a time when Maxine was not present. Latham contended Huntley had deliberately lured the girls into his home at approximately 6:37 p.m. and that both girls had been murdered shortly thereafter, with cell site analysis proving Huntley had switched off Jessica's mobile phone either outside his home or within the grounds of Soham Village College after both girls had been murdered. Latham further emphasised that mobile phone records and eyewitness accounts proved Maxine had been in Grimsby on the evening in question, thus proving the statements that she had given to the police and the press alike had been false. Latham then outlined the details of how Keith Pryor and his 2 friends had discovered the children's bodies on the 17th of August, at a location Huntley had known to be restricted via his plane spotting hobby, and thus where they were unlikely to be discovered. Referencing the likely motive for the girls' murder and the actual cause of death of each descendant, Latham stated that due to the extensive state of decomposition of the bodies, the coroner had been unable to determine the precise cause of death of either child, or whether the girls had been sexually assaulted before or after death. However, Latham stated neither body showed signs of comprehensive neck injuries, knife wounds, drugging or poisoning, and that both girls had most likely died of asphyxiation. In a direct reference to Huntley's claims, both girls' deaths had been accidental. Okay, so he's saying he's not guilty of murder. Okay. they had been accidental. Latham stated that, and I quote, "Only one person knows what happened." After the friends entered his home, however, he further stressed the cause of death was undoubtedly murder, adding, 10-year-old girls don't just drop dead. In reference to Maxine's attempts to pervert the course of justice, Latham stated that as surely as night follows day, the two had conspired to concoct a false alibi to divert the suspicion from Huntley. Although he warned the jury Maxine could not be convicted of assisting an offender if they believed that she had known Huntley had murdered the girls. Maxine could only be convicted of assistant offender if they believed she had known Huntley had murdered the girls, adding her actual motive for providing lies to police with reference to the charge of perverting the course of justice was irrelevant. Over the course of 3 days, Latham outlined the efforts of both defendants to divert suspicion away from Huntley and Huntley's own efforts to destroy all physical and circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime. Although despite these efforts, investigators had retrieved enough evidence to prove the children had been murdered within his home and, within approximately 12 hours of their deaths, transported his vehicle to the location where the bodies would be discovered on the 17th of August. This had included ample fibre evidence retrieved from Huntley's vehicle, clothes and carpets, which had been a precise match to the Manchester United shirts the girls had been wearing at the time of their disappearance. Latham then closed his opening statement. That was an opening statement? Wow. By again bringing the jury's attention to Huntley's claim both deaths had been accidental, remarking, "We posed this question, 2 of them." Good question. He then speculated Huntley's defence counsel may try and argue that he had been confused, commenting, "In that case, they would have to consider Huntley's behaviour over the fortnight between the girls' disappearance and their bodies being found." Testimony pertaining to the forensic evidence linking Huntley was heard on the 24th of November. On this date, a forensic scientist named Helen Davey testified as to the biological evidence recovered from the girls' clothing, footwear and a dishcloth discovered within the hangar at Soham Village College on the 16th of August. Davey testified that she found minute traces of blood and saliva upon these garments, although she had found no positive traces of semen upon the clothing. She further explained the reason for the lack of any definitive traces of semen being discovered could have been a result of the charred and melted condition of the articles she had inspected. A scenes of crime officer also testified on this date that despite Huntley's exhaustive efforts to remove any physical evidence of his crime from his home, a forensic examination had revealed several traces of blood splattering about the hallway and main entrance to the master bedroom. Defendant's testimony. On the 1st of December, Huntley testified before the court in his own defence, responding to questioning by his own defence counsel, Stephen Coward, QC. Huntley admitted both girls had died in his house, but denied that either death had been intentional. According to Huntley, he, Holly and Jessica had entered his bathroom to stem a mild nosebleed Holly had been suffering when the girls had walked by his home. The bath was already filled with water, as he had been cleaning his dog that afternoon. In the bathroom he had slipped and accidentally knocked Holly into his bath while helping her stop her nosebleed, and this unintentional act had caused her to drown, as he himself had simply panicked and froze. He further claimed Chapman had witnessed this accident and began repeatedly screaming, "You pushed her," and that he had then accidentally suffocated her while attempting to stifle her screaming, which had preoccupied his attention as opposed to ensuring Holly did not drown. By the time his state of panic had waned, it had been too late to save the lives of either of the children, and this is his first coherent memory, and that his first coherent memory had been of himself sitting in his vomit-stained landing close to Jessica's body. When questioned as to his failure to call emergency service and subsequent extensive efforts to destroy destroy evidence and divert suspicion from himself, Huntley insisted he had first become preoccupied with whether the police and public alike would believe the girls' deaths had actually been accidental, and he had therefore decided to conceal all evidence of the deaths as opposed to either notifying the police or paramedics. Weeping, Huntley admitted responsibility for both deaths, but repeated his insistence both deaths had been accidental. He further tearfully claimed he had not attempted to fake insanity upon arrest, insisting the trauma of the children's deaths had temporarily erased his memory, and his being in the presence of police had caused his mind to temporarily seize. On the 3rd of December, Maxine took the stand to testify in her own defence, responding to questioning from her own defence counsel, Michael Hubbard. Maxine briefly discussed her initial acquaintance with Huntley, their subsequent relationship and plans to start a family once they both obtained financial stability, before Hubbard directed his questioning towards her return to Soham on the 6th of August and her discovering Huntley had recently washed their bedding and had evidently cleaned sections of the house. To these questions, Maxine explained that her first impression had been that Huntley had, quote, had a woman in the house, adding their bedding had been washed shortly before the 4th of August. Carr further testified to having noted a crack in the enamel of the bathtub, which had not been there when she had travelled to Grimsby 4 days before. When questioned as to why she had then assisted Huntley in extensively cleaning their home in the days following the children's murder, Maxine claimed that she had done so as she had always been obsessive about tidiness. Questions as to the efforts she had subsequently made to mislead both police and media to divert suspicion from her partner, Carr emphasised that she had only lied to the police, the media, and anyone who asked to protect Huntley, who had repeatedly assured her of his innocence and of any wrongdoing, and his fear of being, quote, fitted up by police for the girl's disappearance should they discover the 1998 rape allegation made against him. She further claimed to have referred to Holly and Jessica using the past tense merely because she had worked with the children in the past. Maxine further claimed that she had initially attempted to persuade Huntley to contact police and be open as to his claims to have invited the children into his home in order that Holly could stop her nosebleed, but that he refused to do so, as inviting children into their home had been a violation of the rules imposed by St Andrew's Primary School. She further explained her focus had therefore been to protect Huntley's job and reputation, adding that she had known of Huntley's actual guilt, she would never have attempted to provide him with a false alibi, stating to her counsel, "If, for a minute, I had known or believed he'd murdered either of those girls, I would have been horrified." Concluding his questioning, Hubbard cautioned the jury not to succumb to the temptation of judging Maxine's morality, but to consider her state of mind prior to her arrest, when considering whether the lies she had told warranted any criminal liability, stating she had done no wrong on the date of the children's murder and that she had not returned to Soham until the 6th of August. Closing arguments. On the 10th of December, counsels for both prosecution and defence delivered their closing arguments to the jury. Latham delivered his closing argument on behalf of the prosecution by describing both Huntley and Maxine as accomplished liars. Before outlining the prosecution's case, both children had to die to satisfy Huntley's selfish self-interest. Before Huntley, with Carr's support, had embarked on 12 days of cynical deception, with Carr only revealing the truth about her lies to police after being informed of the discovery of the children's bodies. True, she did wait that long. Referencing Huntley's likely motive for the murders and his claims at trial that both deaths had been accidental, Latham stated, "We invite you to reject the accounts of both deaths being accidental as desperate lies. The only way out for him. We suggest that this whole business in the house was motivated by something sexual. But whatever he initiated plainly went wrong. Therefore, in this ruthless man's mind, both girls had to die in his own selfish self-interest." Referencing Maxine's conscious efforts to deceive the police and the media alike, Latham simply stated, "She had the prospect of marriage, a baby, a nice home, and a new start. She preferred to do what she could to make the best of the position she was in. That involved, at all costs, protecting Ian Huntley." Following the conclusion of the prosecution's closing argument, Coward delivered his argument on behalf of the defence. He conceded his client was indeed guilty of physical responsibility for the girls' actual deaths, as Huntley had admitted, and therefore deserved punishment, although he argued the prosecution had failed to provide definitive proof that Huntley had actually intended to actually murder the children or cause them actual bodily harm. Furthermore, Coward contended the prosecution had failed to provide conclusive evidence to support their claim that Huntley's actual motive for the murders had been sexual. Coward concluded in his closing argument by requesting the jury deliver a verdict of manslaughter in relation to both deaths. Following the conclusion of both counsel's closing argument, Judge Moses announced the jury would begin their deliberations on the 12th of December. Convictions. The jury deliberated for 4 days before reaching their verdicts against both defendants. On the 17th of December 2003, they returned a majority verdict of guilty on 2 counts of murder against Huntley. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of imprisonment to be imposed by the Lord Chief Justice at a later date. Huntley's face displayed no emotion as the verdict was announced, although the mothers of both Holly and Jessica burst into tears. Although Maxine willingly pleaded guilty to the charge of perverting the course of justice, she pleaded not guilty to the charge of assisting an offender. The jury accepted Maxine's insistence that she had only lied to the police and media in order to protect Huntley because, prior to their arrest, she had actually believed his claims of innocence. As such, she was found not guilty of assisting an offender. Wow, really? Maxine was sentenced to serve 3.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice. Minutes after the convictions, the parents of both girls granted an interview with the media discussing Huntley's mindset. Leslie Chapman said, I think he was a time bomb waiting to go off, and both our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I hope the next time I see him, it will be like we saw our daughters, and it will be in a coffin. Motive. Huntley's actual motive for killing the children is unknown, although minutes prior to encountering Holly and Jessica, he is known to have engaged in a heated argument with Maxine, ending in slamming the telephone down. Huntley had allegedly suspected Maxine of conducting affairs throughout their relationship, leading both his mother and some police officers to suspect Huntley had killed the 2 girls in a fit of jealous rage. However, prior to his trial, a criminal profile had resulted in his being ruled by an eminent criminal psychologist as a blatant predatory paedophile who had chosen to lure Holly and Jessica into his home upon a moment of opportunism. The prosecution had contended at Huntley's trial a likely sexual motive existed for the murders. Testimony from Maxine had indicated her suspicions sexual activity had occurred in their home in her absence, as although Huntley had insisted throughout the entirety of their relationship that Maxine perform all domestic chores, she had observed that he had washed the quilts, pillowcases and sheets on their bed in her absence. However, pathological evidence retrieved from the bodies indicated at least one of the girls had been subjected to a sexual assault either before or after her murder was not disclosed to the jury at Huntley's trial. The reason for this decision had been that both bodies were too extensively decomposed and damaged by fire to enable a conclusive determination of either the actual cause of death or if either girl had been subjected to a sexual assault. Although prosecutors at Huntley's trial contended he had intentionally lured the children into his house with a likely sexual motivation, investigators found no evidence of premeditation in relation to the murders. However, at the September 2005 hearing, in which the minimum term Huntley should serve before any form of parole eligibility was decided, Justice Alan Moses stated, "There is a likelihood of a sexual motivation, but there was no evidence of sexual activity and it remains no more than a likelihood." Prior to murdering Holly and Jessica, Huntley had established an extensive record of consensual and unconsensual sexual activity with females, many of whom had been beneath the legal age of consent. he would typically use force to achieve his desires. Between 1992 and 2002, he had committed numerous acts of physical and sexual violence against women and children, for which he had been legally unpunished. The youngest girl Huntley is known to have raped had been 12 years old, with another girl he had attempted to rape being 11 years old. Following his arrest, several former girlfriends and sexual partners stated that although Huntley presented himself as a charming and considerate individual in the early stages of a relationship, he would become domineering and violent upon having established a sense of control. Having established control over his partner, Huntley severely restricted and supervised any contact she held with her family or social acquaintances. He would also emotionally blackmail his partner if he detected any signs of her developing resistance to his control or indicating a desire to leave him. According to one columnist, the fact that Huntley had remained unpunished for these often blatant and continuous acts had embellished Huntley's confidence and reinforced his domineering, misogynistic mindset, in addition to fueling his, I don't know what that word is, undesirable behaviour is what it means. Okay. Psychologists have also determined Huntley has mentally blocked any attempts to accept either the reality or enormity of his actions pertaining to his repeated violence against females in order that he may cope with the consequences of his actions. Sentencing. The minimum term of imprisonment Huntley should serve before being considered eligible for parole was decided on the 29th of September 2005. On this date, High Court Judge Mr. Justice Moses announced that Huntley should remain in prison until he had served a minimum of 40 years, a term which would not allow parole eligibility until 2042, by which time Huntley would be 68 years old. In setting this minimum term of imprisonment, Mr. Justice Moses stated, "The order I make offers little or no hope of the defendant's eventual release." Huntley avoided eligibility for a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment as the passing of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 had been just one day after his conviction, thus taking effect on the 18th of December 2003 and applying solely to murders committed on or after this date. Wow, guys. I don't know if he'd ever get out, to be honest. I don't know, it's hard to say, isn't it? But I like to think that he won't ever get out. And there we go, that is the story of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there, guys. I hope you've got some of your project completed while listening to this very, very tragic story, which I'm so glad he's in prison and not even being looked at until 2042. I mean, he's still got another 12 years from today, so good. So, thank you for joining me, and I shall see you in another episode, you guys. Love, hugs and sparkles. Go hug your kids and keep them safe. Love you guys. Bye.